Hello and welcome to the channel. To begin with, this video has been an absolute headache to make, and if I knew how many variants, subversions, branching designs, revisions and offshoots that were made, I would have saved myself weeks of head-splitting research and sanity and made something more straightforward. In this video, I wanted to cover the extended family of the German MP40 machine pistol used by Germany and other forces during World War II, and the complex design history this significant firearm was born from. I have tried to break this down and keep each section as simple as possible, from the inception of the machine pistol to the MP40 into its evolution into developing one of the first assault rifles. However, looking at this design roadmap that I have made, this is going to be a difficult one, so please enjoy. This list is by no means comprehensive, as there are so many similar variants with minimal design tweaks that I'm bound to miss out by mistake. I have included all the main development milestones and models and the branches out into where different companies have made variants or copies or modified versions and how it all comes together in the end. To begin with, in 1915, the German Rifle Testing Commission at Spandau decided to develop a new weapon for trench warfare. An attempt to modify existing semi-automatic pistols, specifically the Luger and C96, failed, as accurate aimed fire in fully automatic mode was impossible due to the lightweight and high rates of fire of up to 1,200 rounds per minute. The Commission determined that a completely new kind of weapon was needed. Bergmann designed a new type of firearm to fulfill the roles and requirements, which was designated as the machine and pistol MP18-I, the Model 1. 4 different variants of the MP18 were evaluated by the German army, known by their Roman numeral designations of I, II, III, and IV, or 1, 2, 3, and 4. They shared the same basic design, but exhibited differences in the feed systems. The Bergmann MP18-I used the same trommel magazine drum as the artillery Luger. No details are available concerning the MP18 Model 2, however it is known that the MP18 Model 3 and the MP18 Model 4 both fed from a straight 90-degree magazine feed which took Mauser pattern box magazines of the same type used in the Mauser experimental C06-08 pistol and C17 or trench carbine. The MP18 is often credited as the very first submachine gun, as some sources discount the Italian Villa Perosa on accounts that it was originally intended and fielded as a light support weapon and mounted on aircrafts. The first recorded unit to receive the Bergmann MP18 Model I was the 237th Infantry Brigade of the 119th Infantry Division, which consisted of the 46th and the 58th Infantry Regiment, the 46th Reserve Infantry Regiment and the 119th Storm Division. The brigade received 216 MP18 Model I submachine guns for field trials in July of 1918, after the spring offensive had ended. Shortly after reaching the front, the MP18 Model I was used in the Battle of Amiens. Canadian troops of the 13th Battalion of the 5th Regiment Royal Highlanders of Canada were photographed with captured examples of the MP18 on August the 11th of 1918. The total number of MP18s manufactured during the war and the number accepted by the German army remains controversial. According to a French report made after the war, the Germans produced 50,000 units in 1918, but only 8,000 to 10,000 were delivered. One of the most notable post-war uses of the MP18 were the Freikorps, who armed themselves with weapons appropriated from military depots. After the armistice, Germany found itself embroiled with domestic strife during the Spartacist uprising. Many submachine guns that had not been sent to the front were issued to Freikorps volunteers. The government collaborated closely with the Freikorps to crush the uprising and initially did little to stop the guns from falling into the hands of paramilitary groups and factions. Next, the MP19. Though the MP19 was a Swiss prototype submachine gun that was designed by Adolf Führer, it was conceptually based on the German Bergmann MP18. According to results, 92 units were delivered to the Swiss Army before production ended. The MP19 was a toggle-action submachine gun that utilised the Luger mechanism. The toggle lock would fold open upon firing, allowing a spent round to be ejected and opening the breech for a new round to be chambered. The system was ultimately unreliable and not suitable for harsh conditions. Führer would implement the improved version of the MP19 mechanism in his later design, the M25 light machine gun and MP41 submachine gun. The MP28 and subsequent MP28 Model 2 were designed and developed from earlier World War I era MP18 submachine guns. Beginning production in 1928, the MP28 differed from the MP18's design, with a new rear sight, single-shot fire setting, and a number of internal changes. Extras such as a bayonet mount and a new box magazine were a standard. It quickly became popular with the Waffen-SS and Gestapo, although it was used more frequently with German police forces. The MP28 served with standard fighting units, Eastern European Axis countries, and even the Polish underground. Soviet, British, and American troops also made effective use of captured MP28s. Some export models were also produced, many of them chambered in other cartridges. In addition to Germany, this weapon was also produced in Belgium, Spain, and elsewhere on export license. Other examples ended up in South America and elsewhere in Europe. The Lanchester is a submachine gun or machine carbine manufactured by the Sterling Armaments Company between the years of 1941 and 1945. It was an evolution from the German MP28 Mark II, and it was manufactured in two versions, the Mark I and the Mark I asterisk. The later was a simplified version of the original Mark I with no fire selector and simplified sights. Following the Dunkirk evacuation in 1940, the Royal Air Force decided it required a submachine gun for airfield defence. With no time available for the usual research and development of a new weapon, it was decided to create a gun based on the German MP28. After looking at two examples captured from Ethiopia, the British Admiralty decided to join with the RAF in adopting a new weapon and played a key role in its design. Ultimately, it was within the Royal Navy that most of these Lanchesters were produced and fielded into service. It was given the general designation of Lanchester after George Herbert Lanchester, who produced the weapon at the Sterling Armaments Company, the same company that later produced the Sterling submachine gun. The first contract, on June 13, 1941, produced an initial 50,000 Lanchesters that were all for Royal Navy use. The British Army by now had been supplied with a relatively expensive US-produced Thompson submachine gun, whereas the RAF had chosen instead to test the Smith & Wesson Model 1940 light rifle, also US-produced, chambered in 9mm, whose use was not adopted and was mostly discarded. The final contracts were issued on the 9th of October of 1943. Production averaged 3,410 units per month over a 28-month period. According to the contract records, Sterling having made most of the serial numbers from 1 to 9999, and then later on most designations from S, A1 to about A64580. Certain numbers of Mark Is were modified later in the war and designated the Mark I asterisk, the key difference being the removal of the fire selector switch and an additional simplified rear sight. The modifications make it difficult to ascertain exactly where the production runs of each model came from. The MP32, also known as the Bergmann Machine Pistol 32 or BMP 32, was designed by Bergmann. The first batch of guns was made by the Danish firm Schultz and Larsen and was adopted by the Danish military in 9mm caliber. The Bergmann MP32 had several features which distinguished it from other guns at the time. First, it used a magazine mounted on the right side of the receiver and ejected out to the left side, the reverse of much more common submachine guns at the time. Secondly, it had a bolt handle located at the very back of the receiver, which rotated up to the vertical position and pulled back to operate. And thirdly, it featured a skeletonized trigger. Bergmann improved the design and introduced the MP34 in 1934. The model was ordered in large numbers by Germany and manufactured by Juncker and Rohr after Walther declined the contract to build them on account of massive PPK orders. The weapon was similar design to the Bergmann MP18, which itself saw service towards the end of World War I. To circumvent the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles, precluding Germany from exporting weapons and munitions, Rheinmetall acquired the Swiss company Waffenfabrik Solothurn in 1929 and began secret productions of the prototype. What was to become the MP34 was originally designated the S1-100, using the company's standard naming conventions. All MP34s were manufactured with a wooden stock and semi-pistol grip. The barrel was enclosed in a perforated cooling jacket and had a bayonet fixing lug on the right-hand side. Front hooded and rear rifle type sights were fitted. The latter was marked from 100 to 500 metres. The Austrian army adopted the Steyr Solothurn S1-100 as the Steyr MP34, chambered in the powerful 9x25mm Mauser ammunition. With the 1938 Anschluss between Germany and Austria, the German army acquired most of the available MP30s and MP34s. A number of them were rebarreled to 9x19 ammunition and were issued to German troops as the MP34O, the machine and pistol 34 Österreich. The forerunner of the MP35 was the MP32 that Schultz and Larsen produced under license from the Bergmann Company, which was chambered in 9x32mm. The MP32 design was later updated by the Bergmann factory in 1934. The Bergmann MP34 submachine gun appeared. This is not to be confused with the different Steyr MP34. The German copy produced some 2,000 BMP34s for export and domestic sale. With the outbreak of World War II, production once again shifted from Walther to Junker and Rohr under the manufacturing code HAF to manufacture the MP35s up until 1944. During the war, about 40,000 Bergmann submachine guns were produced by Junker, and almost all were exclusively supplied to the Waffen-SS. A less common offshoot of these interwar machine pistols was the Irma EMP. The EMP35 was designed in 1930 by Heinrich Vollmer, chief designer at Irma. It was produced from 1930 to 1938. Originally, the weapon had been far too similar to the MP18 until Vollmer had been brought onto the design team, where he introduced his own designs, which were accepted as the first model of the EMP35. It was adopted in 1935 by the Wehrmacht and designated as the EMP. It was in widespread use with the Wehrmacht until 1932, where it was replaced with the MP40 machine pistol. However, the EMP35 was still commonly accepted as a reliable submachine gun among the SS. In January of 1938, the German Heereswaffenamt requested a lightweight, compact, rapid-firing 9mm weapon for paratroopers and armoured crews. The result was the MP38, a revolutionary submachine gun design which later became the MP40. However, the MP38 was produced quickly because Irma Werke had already produced a prototype submachine gun, the MP36, before they were even approached to produce one. Of existing supplies and built examples of the MP36, very few were known to exist. Few were captured by the Allies, and this submachine gun was select fire and in 9x19 parabellum configuration, which had a wooden body and a steel folding stock. The weapon had one set of markings which read Irma Erfurt EMP36 or Irma Machine Pistol 1936. Nothing else was known afterwards about the design. The WZ-39, also referred to more commonly as the Morse, and because my Polish is really bad, the design was generally modelled after the German Irma EMP35. Common features of the two weapons include a wooden buttstock and a forward pistol grip. The most noticeable difference between the two is the magazine extends downwards on the Morse rather than to the left-hand side of the Irma. The SMG was issued to some of the infantry units as well as tank crews boarding parties of the Polish Navy and armoured train crews. Later, the idea of equipping tank crews was abandoned due to the weapon's size. After extensive tests, construction proved reliable and durable, and the first trial series was ordered in March of 1939, with additional purchases planned. However, up until September of 1939, the production plant in Warsaw only produced 39 of these weapons, 3 of which were prototypes. However, some sources state that up to 52 were manufactured. After the start of World War II, all were issued to the 3rd Rifle Battalion, which were used during the Battle of Warsaw, and to a staff company of the 39th Infantry Division. Only 4 incomplete SMGs have survived, one in the Polish Army Museum in Warsaw, the number 38, which was acquired from the Soviet Union in 1983, 2 in Russia, the number 19 in St. Petersburg, and the number 39 in Moscow, and 1 in the Budapest Museum, which since 2013 has been loaned to the Land Forces Museum in central Poland. The Machine and Karabiner, or MK36, was a prototype German 9mm submachine gun that was developed by Hugo Schmeisser. The MK36 represents one of the early attempts to build a submachine gun for widespread issue to troops. The MK36 features a full rifle-style furniture, a point mount for a standard S84-98 bayonet, a tangent sight that goes out to 1 km. This was due to having a considerably longer barrel than most contemporary submachine guns in an attempt to increase the effective range by boosting the muzzle velocity. The MK36 operates out of a blowback operating system which fires from an open bolt. It has a fire selector which allows the operator to choose between semi-automatic and fully automatic fire modes. The fire selector and control mechanism were largely derived from the MP28 Model 2. The machine and carabiner 42H, or MKB42H, machine carbine model 1942, was an early German assault rifle that fired an intermediate round and was designed between 1940 and 1941. Several thousand of these guns were made and fielded to the Eastern Front in 1943. The MKB42H, along with its less successful variant, the machine and carabiner 42W, or MKB42W, W for Walther Waffenfabrik AG, was the predecessor of the MP43 assault rifle. As early as 1918, the German army began to study the feasibility of an intermediate round and subsequent rifle. Germany adopted the Mauser carabiner 98K on the 21st of June of 1935. This was to replace the Gewehr 98. Contracts for weapons firing a 7.92 by 33 Kurz rounds were issued to both Hanel and Walther, who were both asked to submit prototype weapons under the name of the machine carabiner 1942. The H and the W in the title refer to the first initial of each of the gun manufacturers. The original prototype fired from an open bolt using a striker for firing. The receiver, trigger housing and pistol grip were made from steel stamping, which were attached to the barrel assembly using a hinge which allowed the weapon to be folded open and for quick disassembly and cleaning. The Hanel design proved superior to Walther's MKB42W, and the Army then asked Hanel for another version, incorporating a list of minor changes which was designated the MKB42H. It had multiple barrel bulges, several jams, and one catastrophic failure. Testers blamed the result on poor quality ammunition. In February of 1942, 10 million 7x92 by 33mm Kurz rounds were ordered for field testing. On the 9th of July 1942, field and comparative tests were conducted with the ammunition and the MKB42H rifle. 3,654 shots were fired, 11 cases were separated, 67 rounds were duds, 56 fired on second trial, and many other rounds stovepipe jammed. Failures were blamed on the weapon still only being in the prototype stages of the development process. By March of 1943, 2,734 MKB-42Hs were accepted into service, followed by 2,179 in April and 3,044 in May. These numbers correlate well with the factory estimates for the month being 2,000 and 3,000 respectively. Additional estimates, 3,000 were made in June and 1,000 in July, resulting in an upper estimate of 12,000 units of the MKB-42H produced. However, the production figures of June 1943 onwards do not differentiate between the last batch of the MKB-42H and the first batch of the MP43 Model 1. And now a weapon that needs no introduction, the MP40. The machine and pistol 40 was a submachine gun chambered in 9x19 parabellum cartridges, developed in Germany, which saw extensive service with Axis forces during World War II. Designed in 1938 by Heinrich Vollmer, which was inspired from the predecessor, the MP38, it was heavily used by infantrymen, squad leaders and paratroopers on both the eastern and western fronts, as well as crews of armoured fighting vehicles. Its advanced and modern features made it a favourite among soldiers and popular in various parts of the world and in private collections after the war. The MP40 was a descendant of the predecessor of the MP38, which in turn was based on the MP36, a prototype made of machined steel. The MP36 was developed independently by Irma Werke and was funded by the German army. The design took elements from Heinrich Vollmer's VMP 1930 and the EMP. Although the MP40 is generally reliable, a major weakness was the 32-round magazine. Unlike the double-column stagger-feeding magazines found on the Thompson Model 1921-28 variants, the MP40 used a double-column, single-feed version. The single-feed insert results on increased friction against the remaining cartridges moving upwards towards the feed lip. The problem was only exacerbated further by the presence of dirt and other debris. At the outbreak of World War II, the majority of German soldiers carried either carabiner 98K rifles or MP40s, both of which were regarded as the standard weapons of choice of an infantryman. However, later confrontations with Soviet troops, such as the Battle of Stalingrad, where entire enemy units were outfitted and armed with Papasha 41 submachine guns, the Germans found themselves outgunned in short-range urban combat, which caused a shift in tactics, and by the end of the war, the MP40 and its derivatives were sometimes issued to an entire assault platoon. Starting in 1943, the German army moved to replace both the carabiner 98K and the MP40 with the new revolutionary STG-44. By the end of the war in 1945, it was estimated that 1.1 million MP40s had been produced in all variants. The MP44 was a prototype all-metal submachine gun designed by Werker in 1943. The gun was crudely assembled with a stock made from pipes welded together. This was part of the design philosophy for the weapon, as it was created in response to the requirements of the primitive Waffen program, more or less an attempt to imitate the British Sten gun and to a lesser extent the Papachar 41. Ultimately, its crude-looking design was what made it be rejected by the German army. The gun was designed in 1942 with the sole exemplar known having the serial number of 15 and having February 1943 as the manufacturing date. One theory as to the fate of the prototype is that it was most likely cannibalised due to the dual feeding mechanism that was installed on the MP40-1. The MP40-I, sometimes erroneously called the MP40II, was a modified variant of the standard MP40 with a dual side-by-side magazine holder for a theoretical ammunition total of 64 rounds. Designed for special operations troops on the Eastern Fronts to compensate for the Soviets' Papachar 41's larger magazine capacity. Made possible with a lever on the front of the mag housing, which allowed the unit to slide from the left side to the right side to interchange the magazines. However, the design proved unsuccessful due to the weight and reliability issues. Authentic versions, in addition to the dual magazine well, also have a smaller butt pad and shortened ejector. Introduced in 1941, the MP41 was designed, which was, in reality, an MP40 upper receiver with a lower receiver of the MP28 Model 2 submachine gun. It saw limited service, however it was issued to only the SS and police units in 1944. The MP41 was also supplied to German Axis allies such as Romania, and additional sightings include late war photos of Fallschirmjäger Regiment 3 during the Battle of the Bulge, which was sighted with the elusive firearm. However, in 1941, rival company Werker sued Hanel for patent infringement, and production subsequently ceased of the MP41. The British Sten gun emerged during the Battle of Britain. The army was forced to replace weapons lost during the evacuation of Dunkirk while expanding their arsenal at the same time. At the start of the war, up until 1941, the British purchased all Thompson submachine guns that they could afford from the United States, but this didn't meet demand and the Thompson was expensive. The M1928 costing around £145 per unit in 1939, whereas the Sten would turn over a cost of only £8 per unit. America entered the war at the end of 1941, which placed an even bigger demand on facilities making the Thompson to supply the US Army. In order to rapidly equip the sufficient fighting forces, the Royal Small Armaments Factory at Enfield was commissioned to produce an alternative. The Sten shared design features such as the side-mounted magazine configuration with the Lanchester, the submachine gun being produced at the same time for the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force, which in turn was a copy of the German MP28. In terms of manufacturing, the Lanchester was entirely different, being made of high-quality materials with a pre-war fit and finish, in stark contrast to the Sten's austere exterior. The Lanchester and Sten magazines were even interchangeable, even though the Lanchester had a longer magazine with a 50-round capacity compared to the Sten's 32. The Sten used simple stamped metal components and minor welding, which required minimal machining and manufacturing. Most of the products could be performed by small workshops with a firearms assembly at the Enfield site. Over the production of the manufacturing period, the Sten design was further simplified. The most basic model, the Sten Mark III, could be produced from only 5 man-hours of work, and some of the cheaper versions were made with only 47 different parts. Out of the 47 components, only the barrel and the bolt were machined. The Mark I had a conical flash hider and a fine finish. The bolt on the Mark I rotates downwards to hold it open for safety, similar to that of a bolt-action rifle. The handguard, the vertical forward grip, and some of the stocks are made out of wood. The barrel shroud has vent holes in it, and the magazine insert is fixed to the receiver with screws. A design choice that's only present on the Mark I is the vertical forward grip that can be rotated downwards to make it easy to stow. Over 100,000 units of the Mark I Sten were made before production moved over to that of the Mark II. The Mark II is the most common mainstream variant of the Sten with over 2 million units produced. The flash eliminator and the folding handle grip of the Mark I are omitted. A removable barrel is provided beyond the barrel sleeve and it uses a tube stock. Also, a special catch allows the magazine to be slid partly out of the magazine housing and the magazine housing to be rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise, together covering the ejection opening to allow the weapon and magazine to both lie flat on its side. In addition to previously mentioned, the barrel sleeve is also shorter, and rather than having one small hole on top, has 3 sets of holes that are equally spaced on the shroud. This allows the soldier to hold the sten by the hot barrel sleeve with a supporting hand. An insulating, lace-on leather sleeve guard is sometimes also issued and seen in period photos. The 9x19mm MP3008, also sometimes referred to as the Volks MP3008, was a last-ditch German submachine gun manufactured towards the end of World War II in early 1945. Adeptly, it's also known as the Volksmaschinen and pistol, and the weapon was based on the aforementioned British Sten Mark II submachine gun, except for a vertical magazine, and some had additional pistol grips. The MP3008 was an emergency measure designed at a time where Germany was at the point of collapse. Desperately short on raw materials, the Germans sought to produce a radically cheaper alternate to the standard submachine gun, the MP40. The MP3008 was a simple blowback design that operated from an open bolt. It was crudely manufactured in small machine shops, and variations were common. Typically, the magazine was bottom-mounted, unlike the side-mounted Sten, initially all steel without hand grips, and the wire buttstock was welded onto the frame. Typically triangular, however, the design was changed as conditions inside Germany worsened, and on the final guns, wooden stocks and other variations were found. Just as a footnote in this, I was recently privileged enough to speak to a reenactment group that portrayed elements of the Volkssturm at the end of the war. Though the Sten itself was made from 47 parts and crudely finished, the MP3008 was simplified even further, consisting of less, and made for cheaper and quicker production than that of the Sten Mark II. The Sturmgewehr, or STG-44, was the first successful assault rifle, which features included an intermediate cartridge, controllable automatic fire, and a more compact design than a battle rifle with a higher rate of fire, being designed primarily for hitting targets within a few hundred meters. Other rifles at the time were designed to hit targets at greater ranges. The MP43, MP44, and Sturmgewehr 44 were different designations for or essentially the same rifle with minor updates in production, the variation of which was results from complicated bureaucracy at the time. Developed from the MKB-42H or machine carbine, the Sturmgewehr 44 combined characteristics of carbine, submachine gun, and automatic rifle. The rifle was chambered in 7.92 by 33mm Kurz cartridges. This was a shorter version of the German standard 7.92 by 57mm Mauser rifle round. In combination with the weapon's select fire design, it provided a compromise between controllable firepower of the MP40 submachine gun at close quarters, with the accuracy and the power of the K98 rifle at intermittent ranges. The STG-44 had an effective range of 400 meters, which was considered optimal for the time. One thing to mention with the STG was the unique modifications that some afforded. One of these unusual additions was the design of the Krummlauf, a bent barrel attachment for the rifle with a periscope sighting device for shooting around corners from a safe position. It was produced in several variants, an I version for the infantry use and a P version for panzer variants to use inside of tanks. Versions were produced with 30, 45, 60 and 90 degree barrel extensions. However, only the 30 degree I or infantry version of the STG-44 Krummlauf barrel were produced in any significant numbers. The bent barrel attachment had a very short lifespan, approximately 300 rounds for the 30 degree version and 160 rounds for the 45 degree variant. In some cases, the STG-44 was fitted with a Zielgerät infrared aiming device. The device consisted of a large scope and a large infrared lamp on top, the design of which the scope was being able to pick up infrared that would usually be invisible to the naked human eye. The user had to carry a transformer backpack powered by a battery fitted inside the gas mask canister. Electric cables connected the power unit with the IR reflector, with a cathode ray tube mounted on the rifle imaging IR from the spotlight. The sight had only 50-minute power battery life and was able to be sighted up to 200 meters in total darkness. A conical flash hider was added to the barrel to keep muzzle flash from blinding the shooter. A footnote that I wanted to add at the end of this video was a very strange design German submachine gun that I felt deserved to be included just because of the sheer audacity of the design. The Condors submachine gun was developed towards the end of World War II and was an independent and very unique design by August Condors, a munitions designer and engineer. Only one prototype was built and it was captured in its incomplete state by American troops after World War II. It was sent to the Aberdeen Proving Ground for repair and evaluation, where it was assembled incorrectly without the barrel. The Conda's submachine gun was a blowback operated weapon feeding from a non-disintegrating belt. It had a rate of fire of approximately 1000 RPM and fired from a fixed firing pin. The original belt cover for the weapon was shaped with 2-cylinder sections, but was lost during the war. A replacement belt cover was designed at the Aberdeen Proving Ground, which was modified closely on the MG42's belt cover, a great example and rare find that promotes the strangest of the late war German development. Thank you for watching this video. I know this has been considerably longer than all of my other content. However, I wanted to make something a bit different, and a massive thank you if you stuck around all the way to the end of the video and watched the whole thing in its entirety. I hope no one watching has a bigger headache than I have making this. But again, thank you for watching. I hope you found this video informative as always. Please drop this video a like, as it's truly taken quite a long time to research, edit, and definitely put together. And as always, once again, thank you.